47% of people who genuinely intended to do something did not follow through. That's nearly half. People who meant it and still didn't. This is not a discipline problem, it's an emotion regulation problem, and that changes everything about how you fix it. I'm Vasilis Sampalis, psychologist and clinical neuropsychologist. Every claim in this video is from peer-reviewed research, cited on screen, and the full references are in the description. First, we'll talk about what's actually happening when you know what you should do and don't do it. Then, we'll talk about what research says actually helps. This pattern has a name. When it shows up as a task that you keep putting off, researchers call it procrastination. But the broader pattern, the gap between what you mean to do and what you actually do, they call the intention-action gap. And how strongly you intend to do something predicts only about 18 to 23% of whether you actually do it. So now the question becomes this. If the problem is not wanting it enough, what is it? Procrastination is not laziness. It's a strategy. It's a very effective short-term strategy for managing how you feel. For example, you sit down to do something difficult, and that task generates a feeling. Sometimes it's anxiety, sometimes it's boredom, a vague sense that I don't want to. Whatever it is, the system tilts toward getting rid of the feeling rather than completing the task. And that's when you switch to your phone, and the feeling lifts. It may not lift completely or for long, but it lifts enough. That small hit of relief is the mechanism. The technical term is giving in to feel good. And what makes it so persistent is that it works. Every time that you avoid the task, you feel temporarily better. The system does not register the missed deadline some weeks from now or the time that you're wasting, but it registers that avoidance brings relief. Do that again. Procrastination is self-control pointed at the wrong target. You're managing your mood when you should be managing your actions. We're probably also wrong about the thing we're avoiding. People consistently overestimate how bad negative experiences will feel. The task that you're dreading is probably less bad than you think, but the prediction stays inflated because you keep avoiding, and avoidance keeps the prediction unchallenged. The relief feeds back into the system. Every time that you avoid, relief gets paired with avoidance, and that pairing reinforces the avoidance behavior. People with low distress tolerance experience more relief when they avoid, and that relief keeps reinforcing the cycle. So avoidance trains you to avoid more. It's self-sustaining. All it needs is a task that you'd rather not do and the phone within your arm's reach. And avoidance is not passive. When you're deciding whether to do something that's both rewarding and unpleasant, your brain is running an active process. It detects a conflict, it reads signals from your body physically, and it tips into one decision one way or the other decision the other way. So when you just don't feel like it, that's not the start of a decision, it's the end of a decision. You noticed after the fact that the decision was already made. You avoided. You felt the relief, but then, sometime later, shame arrives. And self-judgment. You start saying, what's wrong with me? I'm not the kind of person who follows through. And shame motivates you to change and to hide from what happened at the same time. The more common response to shame is withdrawal, is hiding, is not trying again, because potentially trying again could mean that you're risking the same shame. Guilt is different. Guilt says, I did something I should not have done, and it makes you move toward the problem and fix what you did. Shame says, on the other hand, that I am what's wrong, and it makes you want to disappear. The emotional environment most people create around procrastination is full with shame. And shame does not motivate the behavior they're trying to produce. It motivates more avoidance. And one study tested this directly. People were put in front of a piece of a chocolate cake. And one group was taught to imagine how ashamed they'd feel if they ate the cake. Another group was taught to imagine how proud they'd feel if they did not eat it. And the same group ate more than double than the pride group did, about 75 grams versus 35 grams. And the reason for that is not willpower, it's attention. Imagining shame kept their attention locked on the cake, but imagining pride moved their attention to themselves and to what resisting would mean for them later. So the emotion that reduced the behavior was not the one that punished them for failing, but it was the one that rewarded them for trying. And there's one more thing keeping the system locked in place, and that's black and white thinking. Either I'm doing this perfectly or I have failed completely. And in people with anxiety and depression, this is the thinking habit that's most closely tied to the self-critical kind of perfectionism, the kind where hitting your goals still leaves you dissatisfied. For example, you miss one workout and the whole week is ruined. A small slip gets scaled into something that feels catastrophic. And once it feels catastrophic, the only rational response would be more avoidance. Because why should you face something that you feel that is already ruined? So you're caught inside the system. The task generates discomfort, and discomfort triggers avoidance. Avoidance produces relief, and relief reinforces avoidance. Shame adds its own avoidance on top, and black and white thinking takes a single lapse and makes it feel like proof that you'll never change. And none of these parts are pathological on their own. But what's not normal is the way they combine. Each one is feeding the others until the gap between what you mean to do and what you intend to do feels permanent. But it's not. The way out starts with changing your relationship to it. Every intervention that closes the gap does it by changing one of three things: how you relate to the discomfort, what action requires of you, or why you're doing it at all. What helps people act in the presence of discomfort is learning to have the discomfort and act anyway. Notice what you feel, allow it to be there, and move toward what matters to you anyway. And this idea comes from the acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. You might think that the alternative is to just talk about it, to get support and process it. But the research says that alone is not enough. In one study, people in treatment for substance use were asked to recall a really distressing experience and stay with it until they felt genuinely upset. One group practiced accepting the feeling, letting it be there without acting on it, and their ability to handle discomfort improved significantly. Another group talked to a supportive therapist about what they were going through without practicing how to sit with the discomfort, and their ability to handle the discomfort actually got worse. So, insight alone is not enough. The capacity has to be practiced. Acceptance alone helps. Acceptance combined with values changes more. In ACT research, the strongest factor predicting improvement was valued action, the degree to which people were living in alignment with what mattered to them. Its effect on reduction in suffering was 2 to 4 times greater than any other process measured. A different study showed this concretely. Researchers asked people to hold their hands in painfully cold water for as long as they could. With no preparation, they lasted 36 seconds. With 20 minutes of acceptance training, learning that suppressing what you feel does not work, practicing willingness to have the sensation without fighting it, they lasted 69 seconds. But with the same acceptance training, plus an imagery exercise connecting the pain to something they valued, like imagining swimming through freezing water to rescue a family member, they lasted 156 seconds. 156 versus 36. It was the same task in the same cold water, and the group that lasted longest actually rated their pain as the most intense. They did not tolerate more pain because they felt less, but they felt more and stayed anyway by incorporating what they valued into their pain. The mechanism is not tolerating discomfort for its own sake, but it's tolerating discomfort in the service of something that matters to you. With a clear reason, the discomfort becomes something that you're willing to carry. So if you're trying to change and it keeps not working, stop and ask yourself why it actually matters to you, why you care. Mindfulness is paying attention on purpose in the present moment without judgment. You sit quietly, you focus on your breathing, and pay attention to what shows up. When your mind wanders, you bring it back to the breath. Doing it consistently changes how you handle discomfort. And the strongest evidence comes from structured 8 to 9 week programs led by trained instructors. In those programs, procrastination improved significantly. The pattern points to commitment and consistency over weeks. The mechanism is interruption. Your brain runs a sequence automatically. The uncomfortable feeling reinforces avoidance, and the avoidance reinforces relief. Mindfulness inserts a gap between the feeling and the response. It gives you a moment to notice what's happening before you react. And what you build with practice tends to stick. In one study, participants' mindfulness gains did not even fully show up until 8 weeks after the program had ended. The benefits did not fade, but they kept developing. And these programs changed two distinct things: mindfulness itself, which helps you regulate emotions without being hijacked by them, and self compassion, that is the ability to relate to yourself with less harshness when things go wrong. Self compassion is what we'll look at next. Self compassion has three components. The first component is self kindness, which means that when you fail, you talk to yourself the way you talk to a friend. The second component is common humanity, which means that everybody struggles and you're not the only one. And mindfulness is the third, which means to notice how you feel without drowning in it. People with more self compassion tend to procrastinate less, and they're also more likely to do the things that are good for them. And part of the reason for this is emotional, probably. Less negative emotion dragging them down when things go wrong, and more positive emotion keeping them going. And perfectionism is not one thing. The kind of perfection is driven by fear of failure, and harsh self judgment was associated with more procrastination. But holding yourself to high standards without attacking yourself when you fall short was associated with less procrastination. So the difference is not whether you have high standards, but it's what happens inside you when you don't meet those standards. One study tracked job seekers over 3 weeks of searching for jobs. And those higher in self compassion reported the same lack of progress as everybody else. But their negative emotions did not escalate the way the less self compassionate people did. The search may not have been easier for them, but they just did not collapse when it got hard. Self compassion may not stop you from failing, but it stops failure from becoming who you are. It breaks the link between I didn't do the thing and I'm the kind of person who never does the thing. And once that link is broken, the cycle of shame loses its fuel and the next attempt becomes more possible. Remember the chocolate cake study? Imagining feeling proud reduced unhealthy eating, but imagining feeling ashamed did not. So the emotion that sustains change is the one that recognizes you for showing up. Self-compassion is what clears the way for you to try again. Everything until now changes your relationship to the discomfort. But sometimes the problem is that the action itself asks too much. Sometimes you're not avoiding discomfort, you just know you should do something and the moment passes. You never decided at all not to do it. You had the intention, but the intention was too vague to turn into action. And there's a way to close this gap. Instead of I'll exercise more, you plan. If it's Monday morning and I have finished breakfast, I'll put on my shoes and walk out the door. If situation X, then I will do Y. And across hundreds of experiments, people who formed if-then plans were more likely to follow through than people who just had the intention. For people with anxiety, depression, or other mental health problems, where goal striving is harder, the effects were even larger. Two things make if-then plans work better. First, going over the plan in your mind at least once after making it, rehearsing it in your mind. And secondly, they work best when you genuinely want to do something but keep not doing it. And there are two reasons they work. First, an if-then plan makes you more likely to notice the situation you planned for. And secondly, the action starts to happen on its own, without you having to consciously debate it. The decision was made in advance. If-then plans don't give you motivation, but they make it easier to act on the motivation that you already have. They take a decision like, do I feel like it? Is now a good time? And make it in advance. A related technique is imagining the outcome you want vividly, and then asking yourself what inside you is most likely to get in the way, and build your if-then plan around that obstacle. And this technique is called hoop. If-then plans don't work for everybody. It may work for vague intentions becoming more specific actions, but for self-critical perfectionists, they can backfire. Making the plan can become another thing to fail at. And the reason that you're stuck determines which approach will help you. If-then plans reduce the effort of a single action, habits eliminate it entirely. A habit is a behavior that no longer requires a decision. The goal is making the healthy behavior as automatic as the unhealthy ones already are. You may have heard that it takes a habit 21 days to form, and that came from a 1960s self-help book by a plastic surgeon who claimed it took about 3 weeks to adjust to a change. But this was not a study of how habits form. When researchers actually tracked how long it takes for a health behavior to become automatic, the average was closer to 2 to 5 months. And there's huge individual variation. Some people got there in under 3 weeks, others took nearly 9 months. There is no universal number. The biggest gains happen at the beginning. The first few weeks are where the behavior changes the most. The beginning is also when it takes the most effort and when you're the most tempted to quit. If you get past the beginning, it gets easier. Missing a single day does not derail the process. The progress recovers fully the next day. One missed day is noise, but missing a full week is different. That does set you back, especially in the first 5 weeks. So consistency matters for habit formation, but perfection does not. What helps habits form? Tie the behavior to something that you already do, but not a time. For example, after I finish breakfast works better than at 9 a.m. because you notice that the breakfast is over, but you don't notice that well that it's 9.3 minutes. Choose the behavior yourself. Behaviors you pick stick better than ones someone else assigns you to do, and behaviors that depend on external rewards tend to fade when those rewards stop. Morning tends to work better than evening because of how your body's stress hormones work in the morning. And simpler behaviors become automatic faster than demanding ones. Start with whatever is easiest for you and form a habit from there. Focus on building new behaviors rather than stopping old ones. You can't form a habit out of not doing something. This is where the if-then plans help. Instead of I need to stop scrolling, you plan. If I finish dinner and I sit on the couch, I'll put my phone in another room and open a book. The single best predictor of stronger habits was problem solving, the ability to adjust when things don't go as planned. So each time something gets in the way, treat it as information and not a failure, and change the plan to fit what actually happened. The most important capacity for building lasting habits is flexibility. Sometimes the problem is not the feeling and it is not the plan. You have both. but you just can't start. You can picture yourself doing it, and you'd probably prefer it if you did, but the push to begin is not there. And research on depression helps explain why. Wanting the drive to go after something and liking the ability to enjoy it once it's happening are two distinct processes. In depression, wanting weakens while liking stays relatively intact. And that's why someone can enjoy a good conversation and still not be able to start the thing they know would help them. Behavioral activation is designed for exactly this. Instead of waiting to feel motivated, which may never come, you schedule activities based on what you value and do them regardless of how you feel. Action comes first and motivation follows. Behavioral activation produces large improvements in depression and smaller but significant reductions in anxiety. And the small brain imaging study suggests it may help restore the motivation system that depression dulls, though it needs replication. Pick one thing that matters, schedule when, where, and how you'll do it, and do it whether you'll feel like it or not. By increasing activity, you create more opportunities to come into contact with rewarding experiences, and the depression lifts from there. You can change your relationship to discomfort, you can make the action easier, and you can get yourself moving. But if the reason you're doing it does not feel like yours, none of it lasts. Most behavior change fades. People drift back to where they started because the reason they were doing it was not something they actually cared about. It was something they thought they should care about. When people do something because they genuinely value it, they're more likely to keep doing it. But when they do it because they feel guilty or afraid of what happens if they don't, the behavior does not last. Across quitting smoking, exercise, medication, diet, and more, people who felt the behavior was truly their choice were more likely to follow through. But motivation, driven by guilt and shame, was associated with depression and anxiety. Earlier, we saw that guilt about a specific failure can push you to fix it. But when guilt becomes the engine that runs your entire motivation, when I should and I have to are the only reasons you do something, you pay for it. The payment comes as the exact emotional states that fuel avoidance. A few things matter. First of all, the goal has to feel like yours. If running feels like punishment, find a way to move that doesn't. And if you can't pick, if it's a class you have to pass, or a job you can't leave, a responsibility you did not choose, then the question shifts. Because you may not always be able to change what you're doing, but you can often change why you're doing it. And not why it's good for you in theory, but why it matters to you personally, what it makes possible, who it supports, what it's in service of in your life. Even work you did not choose can connect to something you did. Watch for the moments when you catch yourself doing something because you feel like you have to or you should, because that's a signal the goal is not really yours yet. And there's a difference between I want to and I have to. The first, I want to, sustains action, I have to, runs out. Even if the plans work better when you genuinely care about the goal. The goal is to change the behavior based on motivation that feels genuinely yours, without eliminating the guilt that exists. Moving your body gives you the capacity that following through requires. A single session of moderate aerobic exercise improves your ability to control impulses, hold information in mind, and switch between tasks. The effect shows up across 40 studies regardless of fitness level, and sedentary people benefit even more than those already active. For benefits to last, 3 to 4 times a week is the sweet spot. You don't have to push yourself to exhaustion, but for the ability to plan, focus, and control impulses, gentler practices like Tai Chi and yoga actually outperformed aerobic exercise. A single walk improves the exact capacities that following through requires. And then there's your phone. Using your phone is not the problem. The problem is using it when you know you should be doing something else. One study tracked students' actual social media use during exam preparation. Students who scrolled when they were supposed to be studying felt more anxious afterward, but anxiety didn't make them scroll more. In a lab follow-up, two groups had free access to social media before a test. Only the group that was supposed to be preparing and scroll instead showed increased anxiety. For the free time group, scrolling made no difference. The platform is not the problem, but the conflict between what you're doing and what you know you should be doing is the problem. And this applies to anything you used to avoid: series, games, scrolling. What you're escaping into does not matter. Reducing usage, even a little, improves things. One trial found that cutting back on social media by about 15 minutes a day improved general health, loneliness, and depression over a 3-month period. And the instruction was simple: use your phone less. The group that was taught to replace scrolling with another activity actually scrolled more. And that's possibly because being taught what to do triggered resistance. But the group that was simply asked to cut back in their own way did it and benefited. So the behavior has to be your choice. If cutting back feels hard, the tools from earlier apply. Make an if-then plan for when you'd normally reach for the phone. Notice the urge without acting on it. Replace scrolling with something specific tied to that moment. Or ask yourself whether what you're doing right now connects to what matters to you. And when you catch yourself scrolling anyway, notice it, set the phone out of reach, and go back. Know what's wrong with me, and know I always do this. And if your strategy is not working, change it. Move the charger to another room. Try a different replacement behavior. Adjust until you find what works for you. Everything so far answers how to start. But the harder question is, how do you keep going after the initial push fades? Because behavior change maintenance is harder than getting started, and the evidence base for it is smaller. But there's good evidence for the techniques that work. A meta-analysis of exercise interventions identified the techniques that predicted whether people were still doing the behavior at least 6 months after the program had ended, and 4 of them are things you can apply to yourself. First of all, make an if-then plan. When this specific thing happens, I'll do this specific thing. Secondly, put something physical in your environment that triggers you at that moment, like running shoes by the door. Thirdly, build up gradually. Start smaller than feels necessary and give yourself something you enjoy afterward. Across over 100 interventions aimed at changing health behaviors, the one that worked best combined two things: helping people understand why the behavior matters and helping them commit to changing. But the ones that did the worst gave people feedback on how they were doing without ever teaching them what to do. So if all you're doing is noticing that you failed again, that's not enough. And this is where problem solving applies again. If mindfulness, for example, is not doing anything for you, try exercise. If exercising alone is not sticking, try doing it with someone. If then plans feel like one more thing to fail at, start with self-compassion. If nothing seems to work, go back to values. So the tools in this video are not a sequence, they're different options. Find the one that fits, adjust the approach, and not your opinion of yourself. Change may not always stick, but the tools don't expire, and every time that you fall off and start again, they still work. Eventually, something else changes. How you see yourself may be the last thing to change, but when it does, the behavior takes less effort. Lasting change involves a shift in identity. You stop being someone who has to push themselves through every action and start being someone who simply does the behavior. And at some point, you stop being a procrastinator trying to be productive and become someone who works. And that shift from doing to being means the behavior no longer requires a daily decision. it's just who you are. You don't decide to become that person. It happens gradually through repetition, through connecting the behavior to what matters to you, and through evidence that slowly adds up. This is who I am now. Every approach that reliably helps people close the gap does the same thing. It changes the relationship between the feeling and the action. Acceptance expands what you can tolerate. Mindfulness interrupts the automatic avoidance. Self compassion breaks the cycle of shame. If then plans reduce the effort of acting. Habits remove the need for decisions. Behavioral activation gets you moving when the starting mechanism is not there. Genuine motivation makes the change last. Exercise improves the capacity that following through requires, and your phone can be managed by modest, sustained reduction in the conflict between what you're doing and what you value. Not all of this work for everybody, but some will fit, and the only way to find out which is to try them, adjust when they don't work, and keep going. And most people believe the path to consistent action is to feel differently first, to find the right motivation, to wait until the resistance passes, to feel ready before they start. The research points in a different direction. Sometimes action comes first, you act, and the motivation follows. Sometimes the discomfort is too strong and you need to learn to notice it without letting it make the decision for you. Sometimes the intention is too vague and you need a specific plan, or other times the motivation is built on guilt and you need a reason that feels like yours. There is no single answer for this, but there is a consistent direction. Stop waiting to feel ready and start working with what you have. And that's enough to begin. One question that the research can describe but can't fully answer is why the gap between knowing and doing exists at all. Procrastination harms your health, your well being, your performance, and relationships. So, why would evolution produce a brain that knows what it needs to do and defaults to avoidance? One possibility for this is that the gap is a bug, a mismatch between brains shaped for immediate survival and lives that demand long term planning. The brain that responded to what was immediate survived, and that same bias toward the immediate is still running. Only now, instead of keeping us alive, it keeps us scrolling. And another possibility for this is that the gap is not a bug. Maybe the brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do, conserving energy, avoiding uncertain outcomes, protecting you from the vulnerability of investing in something that might not work out. Every act of procrastination is at some level an act of self protection. And if that's true, then every time you act despite discomfort, every time you do the thing when everything in you says don't do it, you're choosing vulnerability over safety, growth over comfort, the long game over the immediate one. The resource was never willpower. It's the willingness to feel what the task makes you feel and to keep going anyway. Not because it's easy, but because the life you're building by doing it matters to you. If this helped, there's more coming. Leave a like if you want more people to find it. Subscribe if you want to see the next one. Comments are open. Thanks.